Rowley's Bay's over here. The Fondry Farm is here on 42, but gives you a different appreciation for how important this estuary is.
It will be on the screen.
It will be on the screen. Okay, well, see, I'm old school. This is a historical society anyway, right? I just love this aerial view. All set?
Yeah.
Well, welcome everybody. Tonight we're going to learn about the people that lived in this area for hundreds of years. And it's a story of kinship, storytelling, and most of us are trying to figure that out in our own lives right now. How do we share with the family? We talked about the bricks. And so this evening, what we're talking about is our one Potawatomi artifact, a basket made by a Potawatomi woman who traded it with another person in the same area. Carolyn Fondry, a German immigrant. The basket maker, whose name we're not sure of at the moment, still looking for it, traded it, but she lived at the mouth of the Mink River, and only with permission of a New York businessman, Sam Rogers. That's why the Potawatomi were still living at the mouth of the river. That's the same reason why the German immigrants were there, among all the other European immigrants. And so our story of kinship is not just the family, the Potawatomi family. It's the intersection between the Potawatomi who were here for hundreds of years, the German immigrants and the other European immigrants who were just arriving in 1859 when Liberty Grove was being founded, and the Easterners like New York family of Sam Rogers, and other Americans that are migrating west. Go west, young man, it was already a theme. And they're all the same family, all the same, we're all human. We all need air, water, food to survive. They had to work together with their family groups and their neighbors to survive. But the Potawatomi also had all the same emotions and problems that we had, just at maybe at a slower pace. Definitely not techie, but those are the connections across the years. And when we're talking about the people that Dave is going to introduce tonight, we need to keep that in mind. We're all part of that same kinship. Now, over at the table, I started searching for the Potawatomi last year, and the Potawatomi people did not have a written language. So we have to rely on archaeological evidence, the folklore and the legends and the storytelling around the campfire generation after generation. And then we also have to rely on the people that met the Potawatomi who lived here, the French fur traders, the missionaries from the different religions. And they are going to tell us the story of who the Potawatomi are through their lens, through their eyes. And not fake news at the time, but they're also going to tell us how to pronounce even the word Potawatomi. You know, so when we talk about the people that you're going to hear about tonight, that you're going to read on the handouts, remember that there are many ways to spell a name if you don't have it in writing. There's no common consensus. So the French fur traders might call you Joe and somebody else might Joey or whatever, you know, depending on where you meet. The other thing that we need to think about is that what do these three groups have in common? They love this part of the country as much as you and I do. And that's probably the most special bond that we can have. The one handout with the map, the 1899 map of the Mink River, is my research that I started wading through last December. And then I met my hero, Dave Lee, who is our special guest today from Fish Creek. He's been searching longer than I have, and so his other papers are there as well. The important thing is that Dave got his degree in communications and the arts, and so how did he go after the Potawatomi and the Native Americans? Passion. He is passionate to find out about the contributions of the Native Americans. Just like I was passionate to find what are the names of the Potawatomi who actually lived in Liberty Grove. So I was jumping for joy when I came across the evidence in the 1875 Wisconsin census of Indian Joe and Indian Ben. Two names in writing, part of an American governmental document. So it's on the back of the Ellison Bay Liberty Grove archaeological map. A couple of days ago, I was looking through Sam Rogers' 1876 ledger for his store over in Raleigh's Bay, and I met Indian Joe, same guy, he was the oldest of the family, Indian Lewis, and Mosquito Indian. So I'm assuming that Mosquito is probably the youngest of the family, and they would shop at the store. They probably worked for Sam Rogers. The mystery continues, and that's what you guys get to keep looking for. And in the meantime, Dave is going to share some of his research that's a work in progress book called In Search of Simon. Now Simon, you might know from the what's frequently called the totem pole, the memory pole that used to be at Peninsula State Park. Well, Simon Kakwatos was a very special communicator, and that's who we're going to meet tonight, thanks to Dave's research. And so welcome, Dave, and I will turn off the lights, or do you want to keep them on for a few minutes?
Oh, you turn them on so that you can see the screen now.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I appreciate so much what Karen has done on her own in the space of about a year. It really is a very, very deep subject. There's lots and lots to learn. And I'll just start with my little presentation. This is just, and let me know if the sound is too loud, if it's distorted.
Too soft.
It's too soft. All right. Let me just see if I can get it right here. Can everybody hear okay? Yep. My wife's going to tell us. She's the one with the hardest. Now, this is focusing on Simon Onamwise Kakwatos, and I pronounce the A as an A sound because in many places you'll find an E at that spot, which is the German letter A. So there are a lot of Germans that were reporting. Also, one of the Potawatomi, the young man, informed me that that's the way you should pronounce it because there's no H behind that A. Now, this pole was something that I thought was very out of place because I knew very well that the Indians of the East did not have the kind of totem pole that is so enigmatic, in the West. So when I was in I joined the Gibraltar Historical Association in about 2015, and we had regular talks. There was a gap in our talk schedule for 2017. I learned in January of that year, and I said, well, I really want to know who that guy is that's buried near that hole. I've heard about him, but nobody seems to know what it's all about. So I said, I'll do some research. I'll try to put together a presentation. So they kind of looked askance, you know, the new guy, it's Mumbler Dave. So as you know, and this is for people who are not that familiar with Door County, it's a long peninsula, but there's that little place in the middle, Peninsula State Park. Just zooming in, and right here is a golf course. And on that golf course was that memorial pole. Very colorful, quite a monument. There's, you can see it on this map, it's quite a ways back. There it is with a little circle around it, but off to the side over here is another monument that a lot of people do not even know is there. This is the picture of it. Huge stone, beautiful rock, and a plaque which is dedicated to Simon Onanguese Caquelos, head of the Potawatomi Indians. Now, this is a little questionable head of the Potawatomi Indians. He never really did claim to be more than a spokesperson. Well, I wanted to find out more about it, so I went to the Nature Center in the park, and I inquired of Kathleen Harris, who was a naturalist there. She had a lot of information right away, and she showed me a picture. This is Memorial Day of 1931. So as you can see, that golf course hardly has a tree on it. You can see the pole in the background. But you can see that that's absolutely covered with flivvers. You know, this is the Model Ts and the Sal's and all kinds of what we call antique cars. They were top of the line at that time. They were brand new, most of them. And they're just everywhere. You'll see a little bit more about that. And there was also a postcard, a colorized postcard with this group of very interesting, you look at the variety of headdresses and costumes, and I wondered, could this Simon Caquelos have been involved in that? I have no idea. How would you identify him? And then I went to our Historical Society and I got a little envelope with some articles. Now, you can see that this is from 1931. It's about his funeral, but this is from 1929, a talk that he gave in Kiwani. And it gave me a lot of information. It said something about the place where he was born, a village in Carlton. And I called Black Earth. Well, the Black Earth, I thought, gee, that's over near Madison. But no, Carlton had to be closer here from things I've already read. Now, at the bottom it said, it's now on the land where Joseph Bauer and Edward Fensel have established their homes. The 80 acres is where this village was. So, I went to the Google Maps and I put in Carlton. It brought me down near Kiwani, and I found out it's a township, just like Liberty Grove, it's a town, big square. And can you see down here? Anybody know what that is?
Nuclear plant.
That's the nuclear power plant, the Kiwani power plant. So this is Nuclear Road down here, and up here is Sand Bay Road. And this is Norman Road coming down. I thought, oh no, this is Norman Road. And I thought, gee, now all I have to do is find a river, because you have to have a river to establish a village. So I kind of kept zooming in, and there's the river. They call it East Twin now. It used to be called the Michigan River. I said, well, this looks really good. this is, and this is a little label I put in later. You know, you've got some flat area for corn and then up, you know, the uplands, keep out of the water in flood season. And then I saw this farm, and I saw that little road. Look at the name of the road. Bower Lane. So I said, bingo, this has got to be very close to the spot. Now, in those days, this is from 1909, the many native people would try to cash in on what Europeans perceived as Indian. So here is a Potawatomi couple. Moonbeam, Karen?
We have a
Strong.
movie here. That's
So,
what it-
well, we don't know.
Yeah,
We don't know.
movie here.
We really don't know. This may be a person who lived in this area. But they are wearing Plains Indian garb. The headdress, the breastplates, that's all from the Sioux Indians. Because that was the image that Europeans expected. They said, oh, if you wore anything else, they said, oh, are you real Indian? But this is a picture of Simon Coquatos. This is the one from which that plaque was taken, the picture on that plaque. Notice his headdress is very distinctive. It's almost like a turban. There's one feather, very distinctive decorations, very simple. And look at the pipe that he's holding. It has an unusual stem. This is another regalia that he often wore. Gives a very good idea of the kind of clothes that he felt would represent his people. We'll find out more about that coat he's wearing. This is another regalia that he often would wear. He was a very remarkable person because he mastered a very difficult language called English. It's really a dreadful language. You know, all the ins and outs and the strange idiomatic phrases. He did very well. Many people said that he did so much better than the Germans, the Belgians, and the Norwegians of his day. This is another good picture of him. I think a little younger there. He's still wearing that jacket. But I was determined to find out more about it. I went down to that area. This is the East Twin River, and this is off to the left of that view. There's that big open plain there, and there was a cornfield. Black earth indicated it was a good place to grow corn. And then I continued down to Michigan because I heard of this man, Jim Sussman. And I understood that he had done a lot of research. And sure enough, you can see Fish Mills. You may have been there. There's that nuclear power plant. Those little bubbles is where I've located the Makada Wadiok, which is Black Earth Village. But down here is Michigan, and that's where Jim Sussman had established, or helped to establish, this museum. And in that museum, I found quite a display. There is Simon Coquatos. There's that picture we just looked at a minute ago. And there are the cars, there's that stone, and here is a young man who has been coming to help. Now you can see some of those pictures. He's been coming to help with their pumpkin parade in the fall. And he was a Potawatomi by the name of Earl Meshigan. Meshigan is the proper pronunciation of what Europeans mispronounce as Mishigat. So his great-great-great-grandfather was Abraham Meshigan, who was very much a presence in that area, for whom that village was. There he is with his wife, Aisha. And Jim Sussman also told me, well, you missed the sign. Because I told him I drove through there and I wasn't sure if that was, exactly where things were. You missed the sign. Well, sure enough I did. It's not very in your face, but this tells quite a bit about it. This is another way of pronouncing the name, Makada Wikamishkok. I found about 6 different ways of putting that into the letters. This is where Chief Chief War Thunder lived and launched a raid to save the American revolutionaries at the Fort Detroit. So he helped to defeat the British. The Potawatomi had very good relationships with the French, and they hated the British because the British were always picking on the French, and they were always cheating them in their dealings. And there you can see that sign, and you can see the Bauer Farm just down the road. That wasn't too far off. So here again is a good look, and I believe that this spot here was the site of the burial ground. That's what was a big issue for Simon Cocoitos, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. I actually went up there a couple of falls ago, and that is that site. And as you can see, you don't see corn stubble. I don't even know if it's a good place for growing hay, but we'll find out a little bit more about it. So then I also visited Kewaunee. This is the Jailhouse Museum. I've never been in there. This is the History Center right downtown, and it's just loaded with fantastic stuff from this area where Simon grew up. That is what Simon explained on a visit, probably in about 1925. This young man had found that in his garden, wondered what it was. That looks like a picture of a horse. On the others, there's kind of like a triangle. The other side, there's a man with a bow, and then there's a little picture of looks like a wickiup. And Simon explained, oh, I know who received that. He explained that it was a young couple, and that the chief had kind of imitated all this paper stuff and had created a deed stone to assure that they had this wonderful place located. Here are all kinds of artifacts taken from that area, Black Earth, that are in that museum. And here's a picture of a celebration that the Potawatomi Indians came to deliver at the county fair. And this, I think, would be 1926. And over in the corner is Simon Cocoitos. Now, I learned that he ranged over this entire area. This is a representation of the little dwellings that were very common for most of the Native Americans from the East Coast. They used all the native materials. You can see that the lower level is rushes that have been woven together. They have excellent insulation, and they will swell and seal so that they block the wind. It's really very good protection during the winter. There's also a little gap at the top. The flap can be adjusted for the wind. Very, very efficient little house. This is at Whitefish Dunes. They've deteriorated since this is about 4 years ago. These are kids from the Boys and Girls Club. Just showing them around. And so Whitefish Dunes is up here. This is the Whitefish Creek, which flows out of Clark Lake. And there was somewhere in here, there was a village called Agua Chimami, or Save Our Lives, and there's an interesting story behind that, but I don't think we have time for it. This is Mink River. This is the main place that Simon would spend most of his spring and summer. He was born in Macadahuahico, down near Kewaunee, but his grandfather and his father and mother would go up to this area of Mink River. That was a very special place to them for many reasons. And that's where they would spend their summers, most of his life. So he when he was 14, things changed drastically. We'll talk about that in a minute. So these are some views of the beautiful Mink River Basin. Of course, this is a wonderful aerial view, that little point. And here's that same photo Karen was just showing you. And apparently it was right around in here that their main village was. Still trying to get a good handle on that. And Karen shared some really important information. This is that census, here's that old map, and from which some of the locations we can tie down much better. And you can see on this, there was a column for white and a column for colored, male and female, and the numbers at the top are totals. But you can see with each name, they would say how many males, how many females were in the household. And there is Indian Ben, 3 men, 1 woman. Indian Joe, 2 men, 3 women. So that's quite a bit of information from that era. And this is from Europe Lake dugout canoe. And I wasn't aware that there was a, and of course this wonderful basket that you have. So these are all very important indications that there was something going on in this area. This is a great map that I think is in your handouts. Come on. So, all of these spots are where there were archaeological sites established, and where there's been some active exploration. So, and Mink River, of course, is not far from Washington Island, which used to be called Potawatomi Island. Very important. There's a book that just came out called The Prophecy of the Wolf, by a really wonderful author who lives in Sturgeon Bay, Tom Davis, who also wrote a book about the black colony on Washington Island. And it's historical fiction. It includes a lot of the dynamics of what happened on Washington and Rock Island in the 1600s. So 1679, kind of that, when that happened. The Onanguase that Simon used as his middle name is in honor of his great-great-great-great-grandfather, Onanguase. He was the shimmering light of the sun. And he was he was the first Native American to be named in documents on the Great Lakes. Very important person, and we'll take a little time. But again, imagine the trip that they would make all that way up the peninsula. This is a little kind of museum display. It shows a little bit better what these dwellings at Makeda, what they have been like. Given the winter dwellings are much more stable and heavy construction. There were at least 200 of these at Blackbird. That's another, kind of build or rebuild, what we call it, demonstration model. And this is a nice museum display, and you can see that there were a lot of appurtenances in there. It wasn't just a bare earth hovel. It had mats on the floor, it had benches along the sides, lots and lots of places to hang things. They would have corn and dried meat, usually in interior. And then they usually, during the summer months, they would have little shelters. A very nice representation. But there's one thing, if this was pre-European contact, one thing that's out of place. Can you spot it? The kettle, that little pot. And I won't take time to explain right now, but I think I'm onto something that's not really well recognized about the enormous difference between Europeans, people of the old world, and the people of the new. Give time, we talk about that. That village had been, according to Simon's grandfather, that village had been there for 600 years on that location. So that description that where the Indians were given a reservation It's not at all accurate. That was one place they were able to find a foothold with all these darn papers that people kept talking about. You know, one guy would come with all these green papers, and he'd wave them in front of a guy with a whole bunch of white papers, and the guy would take the green papers and give him the white papers, and suddenly he owned this land where they had lived for hundreds of years. I mean, can you grasp how difficult that was to understand? How the heck did that work? Now, when they left their village, they started north. It was about 1865. This is what most of Door County looked like in 1865. The Civil War had ended. The guys came back. Almost everybody from that area had been drafted or had enlisted in the Civil War. And one thing they wanted to do was work. Well, what was the main thing to do? Cut down the trees. So you can imagine the Potawatomi looking for their village, looking for the burial ground, looking for the food caches that they had left the year before, and finding this. Saying, well, what is it? Is this where we used to live? You know, it would be so disorienting. And then in 1871, the drying of the atmosphere was so intense because of all the trees that had been cut and all the slash that was on. It was like a wooden desert. And fires broke out in Chicago, in Peshtigo, in Nassauwappee. You know Tornado Park. So at 1871, most of Simon's band decided, I'm afraid our homeland is no longer our home. And they headed from Ellison Bay, according to Earl Meshigas, who has oral histories, over to Cedar River. And at Cedar River, they tried to make a home. But soon, a lot of Europeans showed up there, bringing their own ways and bringing diseases. And there was quite a die-off of Simon's band. But a Chippewa who was a missionary had established with his wife deeds to property in this area that's called Canada, near Harris, Escanaba. So quite a few of his band settled in that area. Many others went on to Canada. Simon himself, now after all this mistreatment from his white neighbors, he somehow decided, well, I'm going to find out about what this is with all this green paper and jobs. So he became what is called a cruiser. He would identify the trees that were of value. He would mark them for the lumberman. And I kind of imagine him guiding him away from sacred spots. That's just my take. So he was in Hannibal, but then he got most of his work over in Martin Creek, Nama, St. Jacques, Rapid River. And so he spent a lot of time in Upper Michigan. And I always wondered, now, how did he get from Upper Michigan to Forestville, or to the Forest County, Potawatomi, which is where he passed away. So here is Blackwell, Wabano, there is Crandon, and Leona is in that area. It turns out that he was writing letters to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. In 1906, he started writing letters. So he said, why are my people not receiving any payments? Here is, and he had the bill, the number, HR 5602. I got the letter that he wrote. And in 1807, he got a reply. The reply was, we'll get back to you. In 1808, he said, oh, we've looked into this. And you're in Michigan. This is for Wisconsin people. Even though he had been involved in some of the negotiations, even at that early age. So he began to make contacts with the people in this He lived in Wasaki. Many of his early letters are from Wasaki. Turns out there is a big lumber company that was there, and they would often say Bird Camp. Well, Mr. Bird was the overseer of that lumber mill there. He worked for the J.W. Wells Lumber Company, which was located in Nami. But eventually he made contact with the leaders of the Potawatomi who were in this area. Most of them had come from Kansas. Most of them were from originally their ancestors were from Chicago, Milwaukee, Illinois, Indiana, and had been driven on what they call the Trail of Death. From that area out to Kansas, Iowa, some of them ended up in Oklahoma. Well, but a lot of them, when the agent wasn't looking, they started heading north. And there are many places where they stopped that are real interesting places. I think another reason that he was attracted to that area is there was a good railroad connection. So he was a cruiser, a lumber cruiser, and he became a surveyor. Now with a lumber cruiser, he had to be writing and, writing out the square footage, and surveyor, he had to be keeping notes and establishing lines, and that's very sophisticated work. He was completely self-taught. He had picked up English as a very young child. His father was skilled at it, but passed away when he was about 5 years old. But he followed his pattern, picked up English, picked up from his children's books, reading and writing. So he would take the train down to Madison, meet with all kinds of politicians, historians. He would stay in Green Bay with the Blesh family, almost always. We have interesting stories. But he made 3 trips to Washington, D.C. And imagine, he pretty much funded himself with all this. It was a huge trip. But he met with Thomas Frank Cobb, the congressman from 1911 to 1917, and together they hammered out an agreement that gave some compensation to this group who had pretty much stayed when all the others were sent out to Kansas. They had stayed in Upper Kewaunee, Manitowoc, and Door County. And so it was a sizable settlement that came out to about $10 per person per month. This is another picture of a meeting that he had at the county fair. This is a picture of a man named George Wing. In 1921, they were connected through some other people, but found that they had known each other in childhood. George said to Simon, there were kids that would shoot apples out of the air with a bow and arrow for a nickel. He said, oh yeah, that was me. That was a good shot. And George invited him to stay with him for an entire summer in 1921. This is another regalia that he often would wear. But this is a book which I have right here. Karen really wants to get her fingers on. Yes. Thinking about it. So George Wing wrote articles, and this is a compilation of all the articles that were in the newspapers. Most of it is about the history of the towns and the leaders, but a good quarter of this book are stories that he picked up from Simon about the history of Native Americans. Also, through that book, I was able to trace back Simon's inheritance. So, because it mentions my grandfather said this and his father had told me this, and so it brings Simon clear back to Onondaga, who lived from about 1640 to maybe 1710. A lot of guesswork in that. But there was a great deal of travel involved we know that the Iroquois came from the Mississippi area. They followed the Ohio River, came up here, and began displacing many other people because they were so organized. They had a whole different culture. They were probably the ones that introduced corn to all the other tribes of that area. So eventually, the Potawatomi, the Chippewa, and the Odawa were driven further and further west. And they have many legends about how that happened. But Onondaga meant this gentleman, who we know as Robert LaSalle. His real name is about 6 miles long. And he was a very ambitious man. He was also quite a linguist. He spoke Chinese, Arabic, English, German. He spoke about 9 languages when he came to the Americas, and he picked up the Algonquian languages, of which Potawatomi is one variant. And also he picked up the languages of the Iroquois, which is totally different language. And but he really wanted to establish trade for the French, and he built the first ship. This is probably a very artistic license. It might have been a sloop, but this is the artist's idea. The ship that he built right downriver from Niagara Falls, on the shore of Lake Erie. And then, from there, he took that ship through this very narrow spot, all because of what he could understand from the Native Americans, all the way up here. And he had sent word ahead that he wanted to collect furs to establish a journey of expedition. The King of France wouldn't help us. So this is Washington Island. This is the realm of Onondaga. He was the primary leader, and had probably established with the Menominee the possession of this whole area here. Primarily for the Potawatomi, but also the Chippewa and Odawa. They were all very closely related. But unfortunately, that Griffin, this great ship, was filled with furs, headed back east. Robert LaSalle took canoes and went down south, and the Griffin vanished. We still don't know what happened. It has never, the wreckage has never been discovered. So that is the heritage of Simon. The reason that name was very important. This is another picture of Simon de Quedos, and one of the officials in Kewaunee, I believe. Another picture of him with a friend of his. I love this picture. He's relaxing. He's a little boy, must be watching something very interesting. This, some people are thinking this is a picture of his grandfather, Quitos, very, very famous leader. But Quitos died in 1869, and I don't think there were too many photographers out there at that particular time. This is a real important picture. These are some of the great leaders of that area. This is Abraham Meshiggah, whose father was the namesake of Michigan. This is Wampi Seco, very famous leader. This is David Nsawaquet, or Treefork. He was the greatest hunter, and he was Simon's stepfather. When his father died, his mother remarried this man. He's a very excellent guy. This is David Kishek. This is Ben Akibi. And we're pretty sure that his name, Simon will always refer to him as Dr. Ben, and he stuck pretty close to Yorktown. He died in near Blackwell, place called Taylor Falls. But we were pretty, he may be the one referred to as Indian Ben on those documents.
We think that Ben Akiwi was married to Indian Joe Savi's daughter. We think.
Simon mentions Joe Savi quite a bit in his letters. And, this Sawaquet. And this may be Simon's mother. No, this one would probably be Simon's mother. That may be Simon's wife. Meshibeshikwa, or She Puma. That's a very impressive name. But the only person named is the man that he resembles. The title of that JPEG, this picture that I found on the internet, says David Nsawaquet. Now, Simon was able to visit Kiwani and his place of birth at Simon in 1922. And he and George Wayne and several other people got, and you'll find that on the handout, they were dead set on preserving that burial ground, putting a plaque because of the Civil War, or the Revolutionary War, war thunder. So they made all these plans in 1922. This is just a follow-up of that article. This is an example of Simon's handwriting. This is a series of documents in which he is taking the words of James Wamalisego, who was a prominent leader in the Wabanoma area, and he is dictating his story for him. And getting some of these are people who were leaders at that time. And he would do this to inform these interesting historical figures or people involved in history. The head of the Wisconsin Historical Society, Charles Brown, received a lot of letters I've heard from him. Also Charles Broden, who is Lawson mentions him very frequently. And then J.P. Schumacher, who did a lot of archaeological work. These are some more letters that are in Green Bay archives. About 40 letters, and I've got the whole collection right here. I just took my little camera and my telephone, like the old spy, in the movies, and I took pictures of them all. We also gave the names, the Potawatomi names, or I should say the Anishinaabe names. Now their name for themselves was Anishinaabe. Potawatomi is a mispronunciation of Bodewatami, which means keepers of the fire. The Wa is the keeper. So Chippewa, they were the keepers of the spirit. And Udawa, they were the keepers of diplomacy. So they each had a distinctive role to play. So a lot of these are interesting. The one that's most interesting to me, well, I'd heard Manushikani was the name of Fish Creek. It means a good place for trout fishing. But Egg Harbor's name is Chevalier Skidamine. Ghost Harbor, or I even just saw Ghost River. And if you know about the little creek that runs along behind Chief Oshkosh, it goes down, goes down through that little valley and then disappears. There's a huge berm that because of the currents, this berm was thrown up centuries ago, and it's all boulders. The river just disappears. I think that's probably what it's called. Well, Simon came back to see what has happened with this plant, put up the plaque to memorialize that burial ground. And in 1925, June 26, 1925, he found that his friend George Wing had died. No one had notified him. It's been over a year since he passed away. Couldn't find anyone that knew anything about this plan. He went to the site and it had been plowed and planted. Completely terrible, terrible disappointment. This is in May 23rd, 1927. He wrote to Joseph Lansky, who was the clerk in Kiwani. And he says, just a line to let you know that my condition today, I am very poor now. I have nothing to eat someday. I have no friends to support me. You probably know yet I am old. I was born at Kewaunee County a week today, 76 years ago. I am not able to work anymore. If you will be kind to help me a little, something to eat, to live. About the most pathetic missive you can imagine. This is in 1927, in May. Well, it couldn't have been much more than 2 or 3 weeks after that, this guy showed up. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Hjalmar Poland. He was the founder of the Historical Society here, and a great writer, and he had met Potawatomi Indians tending his orchard. And this is his home below the tower. It was, it was taken apart when the park, when it became a park. These are the big opponents of the park, thinking that it would just be neglected and it would all burn, it would be neglected. I believe this is him, a young man. But this was like a dream home for him. That location was very precious to him. But he finally, worked a deal with the state, and this is the home that he built. This is the way it is now, after leaving that spot. This is on Poland Lane, just next to that new little freehold golf course. And I found out that Simon was indeed there at the ceremonial pole. Mr. Holland had the idea to recognize the occupation of the Potawatomi Indians. It's the first land acknowledgement, perhaps, of this, certainly of the Great Lakes. And he asked Simon to come and officiate. This has got to be just weeks after that letter was sent, where he was really at the bottom. He was so disappointed with what had happened in Kewaunee. I'm sure he didn't know what to think of this guy and this idea of a pole, which, but this is indeed Simon Coqueitos right here. And you can tell because of the jacket that he's wearing. This is a Civil War jacket that a friend had given to him. And he had it embroidered with these very woodland designs. And it's now in Madison, but in Forest County, there's a little cabin with all these mock-ups. This is a vest, there's a pipe, hat. These are all placekeepers. Because Madison says, oh, I don't know if you guys can take care of these. These are very special. So they've been upgrading their museum with fire protection and climate control. I think with this in mind. But notice again, May 23rd, 1927. This is August 1927. So he showed up in style with all these people. Many of whom he really didn't know that well because they were the folks from coming up from Kansas. And at the end of it, they put them all up for free in hotels. Many of them were at Holden's home, and Hjalmar, when they were ready to leave, gave them $100 to be sure they had enough for their trip back. They had to come by an open truck over the road, the 1927 roads from Sturgeon Bay. There was a train connection to Sturgeon Bay from Green Bay. So, how did they attract the attention of so many people? Why did they come? It really is a mystery. And when the Potawatomi, of course, country would like to know, there is the casket that Charles Broden provided for Simon. There again is that picture. Here's another picture of that day. And the colors that are just swamping that area. And now, I'm going to do a little switcheroo. If we had internet, I could have just gone right into this. Now we'll just have to do this. were cameramen at that event. I have seen little bits and pieces of this, and they were very murky, very hard to see anything, but there's been a tremendous restoration attempt. Wow. 15,000 people. That's about a third of Lambeau Field. And no porta potties. These are the pallbearers. Many of these I recognized from that postcard. So they were there at the dedication. Some of them were from the Wabido area, from Forest County. Several, I believe that man with a cane there was from Paris, Michigan, Canada. That's Belmar. Oop! Didn't get in the picture right. I believe this is Charles Roden. Just kind of backing people around. And that is Chief Wamagiseko. We call him Wampum in church because they just couldn't get Wamagiseko. Too hard to pronounce. Because he was called Wampum and Mexico. So the kind of mixture. There's that brand new plaque. Sure you've all heard of William Moffey, for whom Moffey Park is, Moffey Lake is named. And this is a dance to help guide the soul on its journey to the next world. You can see the wild variety of headdresses there. So it was quite an event. I have a little list of explanations that I've come up with how in the world so many people were able to come and how so much interest was generated at a time like that. This is just after the collapse of the stock market. So I hope you enjoyed it. And we're kind of over time already. I just have a few kind of follow-up. Just a few more slides. Well, come on. I can get us right back to it. There we go. Imagine you can do this.
While he's searching on the handout table, there are brochures from the Forest County Museum that they've been upgrading so that the State Historical Society will recognize them as a safe place for the artifacts. You found what you needed?
Yep, this is the little museum in Hannahville, Upper Michigan. Presided over at that time by Earl Meschagad, who found out for sure, he found the documentation that Simon was his other great-great-grandfather. So Simon's daughter, Agnes, is his great-great-grandmother.
Mm.
So he's really both of those illustrious side over to the full screen. This is the interior of that museum. Really wonderful work. This is going to be very endangered because of its black ash and those darn emerald ash boards don't know the difference between the black ash and the white ash. Now we're in Forest County, over near Crandon, and this is their museum and library. This is the library over here. Wonderful collection of books. Great folks. This is some of the museum. well worth a visit. It's been revamped quite a bit. But notice, there's Simon. There he is on big display. And there's a very, very enthusiastic, very well-educated, energetic community of young people there that are really interested in their own history, likely to be our next wave of tourists. So it would be really good for us to bone up a little bit on the history of this people, and so we know where to direct them. And maybe put up some markers here and there. So that is about it. I've got lots of more Thank you.
And trying to cram all the discoveries you've made over all these years in your search for Simon, it's very difficult to fit, in a short evening presentation. Tammy, would you click on the all the materials that you mentioned in the handouts hopefully will guide you in your search if you want to know more. But does anyone have any questions? Well, we've got the expert here.
When did the tribe start naming their children English names?
Well,
Simon, John.
right, became kind of a fad about the time of his birth. You find all these different, there was Simon Okagome over in South Bend, Indiana, who was a very important leader. They realized that these poor Europeans were having a heck of a time trying to pronounce their proper names. And they usually would only have one. You notice Simon, when I was, he noticed all the important people had 3 names, not just 2. Because, they wanted to be sure they were the one and only Robert E. Lee. And, which is my dad's name. But, it was an effort to bridge the gap. And apparently his father was, had a very bright personality and was very popular among the immigrants, European immigrants. Had a good sense of humor. There's some indications that he was bridging the gap, but he wasn't there when the village was evicted by a sheriff and 16 deputies. Heavily armed.
The missionaries also were converting and baptizing a lot of the natives, and so they would choose what we would call an American name from the Bible.
They usually refer to it as a Christian.
Yes, a Christian
Which
name.
of course is
Yep.
John and Daniel and David and Simon, these are all.
That's why I got a kick out of finding Mosquito as one of the names, buying things at Sam Rogers' store in Raleigh's Bay.
Well, it probably was a mispronunciation of his, he was trying to give him his real name.
Well, I still
All
think
they
it's a
could get out of it.
good name. You had a question too.
David, you alluded to your surprise that many people came at that time in our economic tragedies. Do you have a sense of what really sparked all of those people? This was not a very easy place to get to.
Well, Simon had been giving talks all over the state of Wisconsin, mostly in the eastern section, but Lake Geneva, there's a report of a great talk that he gave. Kewaunee, Madison, he knew all these historians, so he had a lot of credibility as a speaker, and historical societies were just starting to form in the 1920s. The battle just to get the harvest in, and all was you kind of had that out of the way. They would become settled, and they said, gee, was that your grandpa that did this, or was that? And they started sorting out their own history, and then Simon showed up speaking English and explaining things, and I'm sure a lot of them were hoping to have him come, and then he's gone. Elmore Holman was a phenomenal publicity man. He knew how to use the newspapers. The newspapers were very, very well read. That was the internet of those days. These little newspapers would just have.
And they'd shared. So
Oh, yeah.
if you published an article in Sturgeon Bay, it might be reprinted in Indiana, where other Potawatomi, you know.
Yeah. And the first Model T rolled off the assembly line in 1917,
10 years.
10 years before. So they were just the new hot item. Even though people were beginning to feel the uncertainty of the Great Depression still coming, getting established. The whole idea of camping. I just got a book from my brother-in-law about Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, and a naturalist, famous naturalist there, and the guy who had I think Firestone. They all went on this huge camping trip with reporters in tow. And the newspapers were full of these camping trips they were making in a newfangled automobile, and how they were able to get through the swamp with their rubber tires. And probably a little help from the horses farmer next door.
Those camping trips were was the event that caused Detroit to almost be created in Kewaunee.
Really?
Well, somebody found a sparkly stone and thought it was gold.
Oh.
And Kewaunee really, that's a very interesting story.
Was
The
there,
Masters invested.
was there another
Yeah.
question? Carol?
Do you have a target date for the publishing of your book?
Well, sometime in the century.
Because it looks like your
It's
research
a
is
huge
far.
challenge, and I wish you hadn't mentioned this. Well, I'm imagining a book, and I've got some chapters written, but there's going to be problems with permission for photographs. They're okay, voluntary, on a volunteer basis talk,
For
but
education.
in a book, yeah. And almost all books are now self-published. And I'm very poor, I'm not going to be able to fund that. But I'm in touch with some experienced writers and they're encouraging. We'll see what happens. And I don't have a PhD.
It doesn't matter.
Except, I have an honorary PhD from Sweetwax.
Well,
I
there you go.
have no less. I've got the document.
Very good.
Did I see another hand?
There is mine. Those of us who knew Virginia Hansen may know this story. When she was a little girl, she actually attended that event. Her parents took her there. And Virginia died a year ago this last weekend. Would have been 98 this year, 97 this year. But she was there as a little girl.
And she is the one responsible for passing on our valuable artifact. She preserved it, and I think she is responsible for stabilizing it. So Simon's legacy lives on.
Yeah, there was I'm trying to track down who was a young woman who was asked to sing by the tribe because she had a wonderful voice and could sing the national anthem in Anishinaabe, in their language. And she, at the pool, there were at least 1,000 people, maybe 3,000. And so she stepped forward on that little stage, and she just froze. She could not get a peep out. And Simon came and put his arm around her and began to sing over the Chief. But he sang the whole national anthem. Anishinaabe, Miwin.
That's why he is our guest speaker. Because I can't
Well,
pronounce
I
it.
just keep You know, we know Obadiah,
There you go.
you know, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Abednego.
There you go.
Nebuchadnezzar.
Well, and that's what's fascinating about the way they spell the name. When I started, I asked the tribal preservation officer at Forest County, do I use the hyphenated spelling, the one where it's all squished together? And he said, well, it depends which book you're using as your reference. And I found that if you take the hyphenated one, you can sound it out no matter what language you're speaking. So I thought that was interesting.
But there were German, French, and English linguists dealing with these, and as I said, Coquillos, I believe that second A should be long A sound. So, Coquillos, I believe, and I have yet to speak with the others, the fluent speakers, but the young gentleman said, well, in my experience, that would be the way to pronounce it.
And when you start doing research,
I shift the first time I get confirmation from the elders.
yes. And one of the early books is the Jesuit reports from America, and if they spent a wintered over with a tribe, they would correct some of their spellings and say, no, that's not what it is, after you listen carefully. So I see another hand back there.
David, I'm just amazed at your passion for all this history, and I thank you for all that you put into it, and you really brought a lot
Well, it's been
to what I've learned.
close to my
Thank you.
heart. For many years, I heard a Mohawk speaker, 1968, explain the relationship of the Mohawk Great Law of Peace and the Constitution of the United States. And I was just absolutely flabbergasted.
So much to learn.
Because it wasn't in my history books in high school.
Yeah.
Yes. And again, the kinship, I was amazed that relatives of Indian Joe and Indian Ben were scattered all the way along the Michigan shore down to Sheboygan and Kewaunee, and Simon was Joe's cousin. That one we know, even the elders and everybody agreed
These
to
letters
that.
spend a great deal of time explaining the connections and where did so and so pass away.
Yeah.
We knew there were a lot of them that were in Leelanau County in Lower Michigan. And he tells how many children they had, what relationship.
What a resource.
Yeah.
I mean, he was the
And
story.
this is just the one collection of letters from the George Wayne and then the successor George Wayne. And I'd love to find more caches of these letters. I don't know if my car is gonna hold out that long, or me.
Well, thank you for sharing what you've already found.